Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Donna Bragg. I am the publisher of Texas CEO Magazine, and we are delighted to have partnered with Werq for this series on what they don't tell you about transformation. This is the third session in our series today, and we want to welcome you and welcome Gavin, everyone. Gavin Palmernella is a successful entrepreneur. He is an executive coach. He's currently the president of Werq. And today he is going to talk about how leaders can use emotional intelligence to engage and empower and develop resilience in all of your organizations. He's going to explain the science of emotions and their impact on success, and then also share how you can build your organization's emotional intelligence levels. Ultimately, how you can use EI to make decisions and to collaborate and to overcome obstacles. So we're all going to get a little more emotionally intelligent this afternoon. And we want to remind you, this is an interactive session. There are plenty of opportunities to share your own thoughts and your questions. Feel free to type your questions into the chat at any time. And with that, everyone, welcome Gavin Palmernella.
Thank you, Donna. I appreciate you inviting me to speak today. Welcome to everybody who's joining us as well this afternoon. I'm looking forward to sharing what for me is a passionate topic. In my executive coaching with executives, I find that this topic comes up from time to time again in what's driving their effectiveness or getting in the way of their effectiveness. And so I'm looking forward to sharing more about that. As Donna mentioned, this is the third in the series we're running this month. In the first of the sessions, which you can go to the recording and listen to, Michael Leckie talked about transformation and what's at the heart of transformation, and about that human aspect in the way we need to engage with people and bring people into change as opposed to telling them to change. In the second session, we had Scott Tibbles talking about how we manage our energy and how it's not enough just to manage time when you have all of the work that comes through and the challenges that come from driving change and transformation in an organization, but you actually need to be very selective in how you use that time and the energy that is most effective for it. So I'm going to be talking, as I said, as Donna has introduced, about emotional intelligence specifically. And a big part of emotional intelligence is the resilience it brings to an organization and to individuals leading the organization as you're going through a lot of change. So what I hope you get from today is three key areas that we're going to be touching on. One is an understanding of why emotional intelligence matters. Two, what it actually is about. We use the phrase out there, we hear EI, we hear EQ, etc. But what actually is emotional intelligence? And then probably most importantly is how can you use this with your team? So how do we take what is a concept, some theory, and apply it in practice? So I'm going to go to the first question, and I'm going to hope that some of you wouldn't mind putting some comments in the chat box. But if you reflect on the best leaders that you've worked with in the past, whether it's organizations you've been a part of, or people that you've come across in your careers, I'm interested to know which of these items that you see on the screen have stood out for you in what makes them really effective leaders. I'm just going to give a moment for you to capture some of your thoughts. Okay. Thank you, Michael, Scott, Rihanna, Ilana, great. Give it another moment. So as you can see, there's a range of things that people are referring to here. It's not one that's standing out across everything. And from personal experience, it's actually a blend of all of those that I've found stand out. So it's the combination that makes the difference. It's not just technical knowledge. It's not just interpersonal skills, but it's how you bring all of these together that are going to make the difference in how effectively you can lead others, how you have the credibility, and how you bring them along on a journey. Trying to give that a bit more context. the World Economic Forum has been doing a survey, a research study over the last number of years, where they look at what types of skills are required around the world in industry in general, and how those skills might be evolving in what businesses are looking for. And what we see on the left-hand side is this increase in needs around these particular top 10 skills that they've identified. And this is what they found is needed over the next year in particular. So they look at it every few years. And as you can see, there's some obvious things that we know from the way technology is moving around analytical thinking and innovation, technology, etc. So there's some common things that you'd expect to be in there. You also see a movement away from manual dexterity and managerial skills, etc., and are leaning much more to interpersonal style skills. And it's those interpersonal skills that I've highlighted on the left-hand side, which all relate to emotional intelligence in some way. So even though EI is called out in number 8 specifically, those other items that I've listed benefit from a well-developed EI and an effective EI being demonstrated in the workplace. So this gives you a sense of, as your businesses are evolving, as you are looking for different skill sets and capabilities in your team members and in your leaders, etc., these are things that are becoming more and more critical in what's going to make them successful. If we go to another level then, and you think about just what it means to be a leader, and given the nature of this forum, I'm assuming that all of you are leaders in some way in your organizations, whether you're the CEO of C-suite level or a leader of a division, etc. You are going through a day-to-day responsibility set, which is around how you give direction to your people, how you enable them, how you keep them focused and oriented and engaged. But one of the realities that's really stand out is, what I want to show on this page here is that you can't do it on your own. There's a reason that we have teams. The reason why we bring people together in organizations to achieve an outcome. And its most fundamental, though, is in a leadership role, is you simply don't know it all. You're not expected to know it all. You don't have expertise in every aspect of what you are leading. And so you need to be able to marshal and bring together the people you're working with to get the answers needed to run your business. Most of us have a view of what is going to make sense, how to approach a problem, how to solve for a challenge that we're coming up in the business. But most of those views that we have are based on prior experience. And by definition, that experience is going to be fairly limited in nature. It's based on the role you've done before, the industry you've been in before, and even the part of the world you've done it in before. And so it's likely that you are going to be locked into a particular view of how something works or how to approach a solution, a problem. And so what we tend to find is that we have these innate biases around ways to go about running our business and our teams. And if you can open up and engage more people with different types of experiences, you're more likely to be able to test whether those biases are relevant, appropriate, and alternative ways of doing them. Which comes to the third point, is that often there's different ways of getting to the same outcome. And not all of them are better than the others. There might be multiple ways to get to the same thing with the same impact and challenges, etc. So it's a personal preference on how to get there. And so if you can help people understand what the outcome is that is needed, maybe it needs less emphasis on how you actually get there. Next, if we think about change is not something you do to people, change is something that you do with people. And if you involve other people in the right way, you are more likely to enable change in your organization, in the way things get done, what gets done, how you position yourself, etc. And lastly, things keep on changing themselves. Whatever change you are leading, the context in which you're doing it in is also changing. And so you need to adapt constantly to that. And so in this last piece is really powerful, because if you think that change is an event, then you're going to be disappointed, because change is this ongoing evolution of things that we are working with. And if you can create an environment and a culture for your organization where it's effective at dealing with that, then you're going to be much more successful as a business. So let me stop telling you some stuff for a moment. I'm going to ask you another question. And I'm not going to expect you to put this in the chat box, because this might be a little bit sensitive and personal. But how well developed do you think is your own emotional intelligence? Now just pause while you think about it. Do you think you're better than most other people, average, or do you have a lot of blind spots that you need to work at? Okay, I'm going to give you an example here of a particular person that I was working with not too long ago. And while this is an example of one particular person, it's something I come across fairly regularly. These are comments made in a 360 feedback session. And as you can see, referring on the left-hand side, credible experience and success. But he always needs to remind people of that success. The middle comment, we'd like him to let others give more comments and thoughts and opinions. He needs to spend more time listening. He seems to need to be seen as the smartest person in the room. And yet people see him not as arrogant. Somehow he has this blind spot to always want to show how smart he is. So if you think about this and what it tells you about how effective this person's emotional intelligence is, if we go back to the question I asked you about yourself, would you say this is poor, average, or well-developed? And I'd like you to put your thoughts in the chat box about that. Give you another few moments. Average. Anybody else going to take a guess? Okay, let's get a few more. Okay. So far, the consensus is average. Okay, let me take you out of your misery. Thank you for those people who answered. Yes, the answer is average. If you look at this particular example, this is the same individual and the data that was collected in his 360. This bottom line in each competency shows that he scored as average. And yet you saw those very negative comments about him. Okay. What is interesting in this point, though, is that what they see as important for this individual as a CEO is much higher. They want it to be more than others in every case. So it's a high importance, and he's only doing it on an average level. And so the point here is that average is not good enough if you are in a leadership position. Okay. So why is that so important? If we think about our role as leaders, we see ourselves as needing to inspire performance in our people. We also recognize that in some respect, emotions impact performance. The way we feel about it, we know it about our own emotions. If we're feeling down or frustrated, we know that it impacts how effective we are at what we are doing. And it applies to people on a much broader basis as well. Where emotional intelligence comes in is connecting those two. It's how effective are you at inspiring performance and maintaining that inspiration, making it real and sustainable. And to do that, you need to be tapped into your emotions and rather be a moment in time where you may be able to leverage something. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of theory behind this, but at a very high level. So the science of emotions, and I'm not going to go through this in every single box, so you can hear the sigh of relief there. But the choice you have as a leader is to decide whether you're going to take the top path or the bottom path. And that choice doesn't just apply to you as an individual, it applies to you in the context and the conditions you create for others. If you choose to take the top path, you're creating conditions and an environment at this point where your emotional brain feels that you are valued. You are able to contribute and have impact. And what that does, it has a chemical reaction in our brains that make us, by definition, more creative, more open-minded, more engaged. And the outcome of that is that our decisions are much more informed and much more impactful and valuable. Conversely, if you have low emotional intelligence and you create a negative environment, your own decision-making is going to be poor, but you're also going to create the context and environment for other people to be defensive, protective, and engage in behaviors that are negative. That adrenaline that all of that creates and stimulates also makes us very narrow in our way of thinking, less open to different ideas. And that results in poorer decisions, less well-informed decisions, and poor behaviors. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of what's actually happening, and that when we talk about the so-called soft skills, these are actually biological impacts that are having in our brains, and that we have control over those. So what we've learned so far is that emotions impact the quality of decisions. They impact the types of behaviors we exhibit and that we encourage in others. And together, that drives performance. So this is not something that's just a nice to have, but it actually has an impact on our organizations. So let's change tack slightly here. So we came into this series talking about transformation. So how does emotional intelligence relate to transformation? And I'm going to take you back to our first two sessions in the series. Michael talked about behaviors changing beliefs. And we've just talked about what drives behaviors. Talked about curiosity being one of the most valuable and impactful behaviors. And somebody who has low self-awareness and awareness of others is less likely to be curious. Change as a way of being is a way of being and not an event. So it's how do we live our lives in an environment where change happens rather than something that we just got to get through. Change starts with leaders. We talked about that as well in the first session, is that if you don't change yourself and demonstrate the behaviors that you expect from your team members and your organization, they're not going to follow it. They're not going to just listen to what you said. They're going to listen to what you do. Creating an environment of empathy and psychological safety creates those conditions that I just talked about, which make people much more open and receptive to differences, to opinions and ideas and exploration. And something that Scott touched on last week as well, which was really powerful to me, was that every one of our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors has an energy consequence. So if we're feeling overwhelmed and we're struggling to keep up with what we are doing, by controlling our emotions and our behaviors through that, we are able to be more effective at managing our energy. Okay. So if we bring that all together and we think then about what is leading change actually about, so we know what the conditions need to be, but we know that in a change environment, we're trying to bring other people along on a journey. We're trying to influence them to buy into a concept we have, a vision we have. To be able to influence them, we also need to recognize what their particular needs and motivations are. We're not all the same. We look at things differently, and we look to achieve different things from the same situations. So understanding that is what really helps you start on this journey of change with people. You need to develop trust in them. They're not going to follow you if they don't trust you and your intentions. And to get trust, you need to be authentic. Being resilient, because there will be hurdles, especially in large transformation change in an organization. You're going to come across hurdles more often than you would like. And the way you put those into perspective, the way you understand and unpack them and deal with them, that is all about resilience. And there's a number of other aspects of resilience. We talk about resilience that gets built from our emotions, which we're talking about today. There's resilience that comes from physical well-being, from the social well-being and the connections you have with other people. And so that's a real key foundational element in helping you see change through to the end, to that next phase where the next part of change starts happening. Being an exceptional listener is another key element, and Michael touched on that in his first session. And making informed decisions that are based on an understanding of what's really going on, what the real options are, what the consequences are. It might not be the perfect decision because we only know that in retrospect, but we certainly know going into it that we've made every effort to understand the choices we have more fully. Okay, so how does that show up? Here is a model of emotional intelligence. It's not the only model that exists, but what you'll find across the different tools of emotional intelligence, if you look at the center list, these are the competencies that are referred to in this model. They all have two elements that are key. One is around awareness, whether it's of yourself and of others, and the other, which is of action. What are the actions you take with the awareness you've gained? And it's common sense that if you just have awareness but don't do anything with it, it's not going to achieve a whole lot. And so what this model is emphasizing is that you need all elements of this. The other thing that this model highlights is that we are all human beings. We are fallible. We have triggers. We have things going on in our lives that mean that we are not always on this right-hand side productive state. It happens throughout the day. And probably you can all think of a moment in the last 24 hours where you experienced or certainly exhibited being one of those items on the left-hand side. You were maybe more temperamental with somebody in your family. You were distracted in a meeting. You weren't as sensitive as you could have been to somebody who was going through some challenging times. That happens, and that's okay. That's normal. The difference with somebody who's developed their emotional intelligence and one who hasn't is that the well-developed one recognizes when they're on that left-hand unproductive side. They also know what to do to get back to the productive side. And so keep that in mind. This is not about whether you are perfect in all circumstances or not, but it's having that insight, understanding of how you can make a true effort to be more on the right-hand side than the left-hand side. Okay. Also, the words that you see on the left and the right are particularly key because that's how people will perceive you. If you wonder how it comes across to be authentic, you're going to come across as genuine. If people don't think you're authentic, they're going to not have trust in you. So use those words as a bit of a test of yourself even. And sometimes when I'm working with people in a coaching environment, I ask them to actually evaluate themselves on these words on over a period of time. Every week, just spend 10 minutes thinking about how have I showed up this week? Where have I leaned more towards? Because that gives you some insights into what's triggering you, where you might want to put some more attention. Okay. So we're coming towards sort of the so what of all of this now. And I want to talk about strategies for your team. So if you think about this in the context of you as an individual leader, you as a leader of a team, you as a leader of an organization, there's something that you can do, or a set of things you can do that are going to help you and your organization be much more effective at dealing with change, at being actually welcoming change and the opportunities it provides. So the first strategy is built around a key aspect of emotional intelligence, which is that it can be learned and developed. EI is not something you're born or not born with. It's not a personality trait. It's a skill that we learn, we develop throughout our lives, but some of us are more effective at learning it because we give more attention to it. Also, if we don't use it regularly enough and give enough attention to it, we get rusty at it. We become less effective at it. So once you have it, doesn't mean you keep it automatically. And I use this analogy of the tennis player here. I don't know if any of you are tennis players. I play tennis every week. Maybe you play golf. It's a similar scenario. Is we learn the skill of how to play the game, how to do a particular stroke. And so we know that we have the theoretical knowledge of that. We practice it and we get better at it. And so we advance in our ability of that particular game. We also know, I certainly experience it, if I go through a winter where I haven't played tennis and I start again in the spring, certainly here in the Northeast where we can't play out in the snow, I find I'm really rusty and I've gone backwards. And emotional intelligence is exactly the same in principle. If you don't use the EI skills and behaviors regularly, you become less adept at them. The good thing is, if you practice them, you can rebuild them. Now, you might want to choose about what you focus on. You saw 6 competencies that I showed you earlier, and each of those competencies have a number of behaviors associated with them. What is helpful is narrowing down which one do you want to focus on first. And you know, I've got there being strategic. And one way to be strategic is say, okay, what matters most for me right now? Whether it's in your personal life, whether it's in your business scenario and what's going on in your business, but is there a particular aspect that says, I should give more attention to this particular competency? And based on that, build a plan. And there's a lot of tools, and we can help you even with some of those tools around how do you build a plan that develops a particular EI competency. Okay. Strategy number 2. As a team, if you're not demonstrating this, as I said earlier on, your broader organization is not going to follow. And so what I find really effective with the teams that I work with is if they create an accountability framework. So first of all, they actually talk about what they're going to commit to. They get very clear and specific about what good looks like when they demonstrate it. They commit to demonstrating it. And equally importantly, they build in reflection. As a team, they will regularly talk about how they are living up to these expectations, the expectations they've committed to together. That's what starts evolving them. That's what creates the learning for them. And that's what starts showing the authenticity in their words to the rest of their people. The third strategy is create systems in your organization that make productive behaviors more normal. If you design a process that includes, let's use an example, a way you make decisions in the organization. If that decision-making process includes the need to bring other people's perspectives into it, a cross-functional approach, for example, etc., Those are the types of processes you can design purposefully to demonstrate productive behaviors. The way you resolve conflict in your organization, the way you maybe even encourage conflict in the productive sense, where it's okay to disagree. I'm working with a client right now where the feedback in a staff survey is that the CEO is resistant to feedback. He asks for the feedback, he does the surveys. When he gets given the feedback, he pushes back. He tries to justify everything. And he's not listening in an open way. And so what hangs, this feedback that's given is left hanging there. And it's been hanging there for a few years already. So the trust has been eroded. And so he's got a long journey now to rebuild all of that. So build in these systems that allow those things to happen effectively and to demonstrate EI in a natural way. And then lastly, as a follow-on to that really, is recognize productive behaviors and reward productive behaviors. I think we've all come across organizations, and maybe we've been in them ourselves, where we have this choice to make it from time to time, whereas doesn't matter what somebody does versus how they do it. And certainly what I've experienced over my 25 odd years in leadership roles is that you need the combination. Just because you're the top salesperson or have the best connections in the industry, if your behaviors are poor, it's going to ultimately undermine the business and the organization overall. So recognize and reward for the right things, deal with those that aren't being demonstrated correctly. Okay, so I'm coming to an end now, and really just in closing, wanted to reinforce, first of all, emotional intelligence starts with you as the leader. You have control over it. You are in a position to demonstrate it and not be dependent on somebody else, whether you do it or not. Be deliberate, not just intentional. Too many of us, the exercise plan is an example of this. We intend to exercise. We even create the plan to exercise and what exercise we're going to do. We just never do it. And in a year's time, 1st of January, we have the same resolution again. Make it part of your organization's culture and values. Build it in. Don't do it because there's a change that's happening that you need to facilitate in some quick way. Make it more real and build it into everything you do in the way you make decisions and choices in your business. And I'll leave you with this quote that certainly resonates for me from Maya Angelou, that to me is really, really meaningful, and I can relate to it in the leaders I've worked with in the past. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So hopefully that gives you some food for thought, some practical ideas on what you can do for yourself and for your team in the way you can drive emotional intelligence to a unique proposition for your organization and success criteria for your business. So thank you for that. Before I hand over to Rihanna for questions, and I'm happy to take questions, I just wanted to highlight that next week is going to be the fourth in our series. Ilana Zivkovic is going to lead that in a conversation with Jonathan Ross. And basically, we're going to talk about actual experiences in transformation, real world experiences, what they've learned, what works, and what you can maybe take away from it as some tips and apply in your business. So please sign up for that straight away after this presentation. But with that, I'm going to hand over to Rihanna and happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Gavin. While we give people a couple of seconds, if they have any questions, they're more than welcome to put it in the chat. I will put up an offer on the screen. As we've been doing for all of these sessions, we are offering a free 30-minute conversation with a change expert like Gavin, Michael, Scott or any of our other change experts at Werq, if you want to dig into some of these skills with some one-on-one support, this is a great way to do that. Get some advice and some insight from an expert in this area. And with that, we do have a question. This says, related to strategies to build EI, where have you seen people have the best results, building on what's already strong or seeking to improve areas that are relatively weak?
Thanks, Rihanna. Great question. There's different theories around where you start on this. I like to, and certainly what I've found that's effective, is to leverage strengths to address some of the development areas that you have. So what I mean by that is the strengths often are the source of the solution to the other areas that you want to work on. And if you can be more clear about why they are strengths, what are you doing that makes them effective, and how you can use elements of that to tackle some of the other areas, then it's easier for you to create an actual plan and strategy around that. So yeah, I would start off with the strength, but it's not to avoid the other area, it's to create the platform for the other areas.
Thank you. We have another question that says, Gavin, how do you start to get leaders with low EI to see that?
Yeah, so the principle being that you need the EI to recognize that you need EI. It doesn't always work, but where I tend to go, and maybe this is more of a personal style I have, I try to collect data. I give leaders insight into the impact their behaviors are having on others. What's it doing in the way teams are performing relative to each other? What is it doing in the way they see turnover of key talent? What is the word on the street about how things get done? What's acceptable and not acceptable in the organization? And a lot of this is through data that's not necessarily the hard data that you collect in a staff survey, but it's in what's the chatter in an organization. And as a coach, I often try to get into an organization and listen to that chatter to get real insight into what's going on. So thank you, Michael, for that.
Okay, and we'll give it one more second if there's any other questions coming in. And with that, Gavin, I want to thank you for joining us today and teaching us all about EI and showing the competencies that I think were very helpful to have as a visual reminder and an indicator of areas that we can look to develop these skills. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining with us. We will be here next week as well. Join for one last session, the end of the month, for our series on change management and what they don't tell you about transformation. Thank you all.
Thank you.